Hi everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to be comparing the 140mm EVIL Offering to the Kona Process 153. I chose these two bikes because they're both linkage-driven single pivot designs, have 29-inch wheels, and slot into the trail category of bikes by having more than 130mm of travel and less than 160. Before I go further, I want to give a special thanks to everyone who's recently become a part of this channel. In the past couple of weeks, there's been a huge outpouring of support, and I'm really excited for the future of this channel. A particular thanks goes to an individual named Reisuke, who ended up donating directly towards this specific video. I should also point out that due to the huge number of bike requests, I've actually decided to start running polls on Patreon to try and get solid numbers for which bike to analyze next. If you want to become a part of the polls, please head over to my Patreon page using the links down below. Thanks. Getting back to the bikes, there's a lot of people who think that single pivots are old school tech, but this video might change the way you think about these suspensions. As always, the analysis will begin by looking at how the bikes react under braking and acceleration, known as anti-rise and anti-squat. There is a link in the top right looking at the theory of these concepts if you need more information about them. Unlike other designs I've looked at, the instantaneous center of the suspension is the main single pivot, and it never moves. This pivot is located just above the bottom bracket in both designs. The rest of the pivots don't matter when looking at the anti-rise and anti-squat. However, they do make a big difference when it comes to leverage ratio, which I'll look at later in this video. First, let's look at the EVIL Offering, where you'll notice a smooth, linearly decreasing anti-rise. All things considered, this is actually pretty good, as it'll be nice and level when braking during the first half of its travel, and still fairly level and slightly more active during the second half of its travel. Switching over to the Kona Process, one notices that the anti-rise is slightly less than the Offering, resulting in the suspension being slightly more active than the Offering. While still remaining mostly level during braking, the Process, however, will be able to pitch forward a little bit more under braking due to its lower anti-rise values overall. When comparing anti-squat values between the two bikes, you'll notice that the EVIL Offering has much higher anti-squat compared to the Kona Process, due to the placement of the main pivot point slightly further up from the bottom bracket. This results in the chainline and swing arm intersection being behind the bottom bracket for the Offering and in front for the Kona, thereby having a large effect on the anti-squat values. Looking at these values, the Offering has an anti-squat that slowly decreases from 120 to 100, while the Kona plummets from 100 to around 50 at full travel. As a result of this, the Offering will have no pedal bob overall, but higher pedal kickback and slightly firmer suspension feel due to the higher anti-squat numbers. The Kona, by comparison, will exhibit pedal bob, but be very active and supple during its travel. After seeing how a seemingly small change to pivot location can make a large change to how a bike rides, it should come as no surprise that the kinematics of these bikes is radically different due to the complex arrangement of pivot points on the EVIL Offering compared to the more traditional arrangement on the Kona. One thing I should point out with the EVIL Offering is that because its rear swing arm is one solid unit, its back end is going to be significantly stiffer when compared to the Kona Process. As you can see from the graph, the leverage ratio of the Offering is definitely not flat or even linear, which one might expect from a single pivot design. Instead, it shows a very progressive first half of the travel, followed by a mostly linear second half. In stark contrast, the Kona Process, despite having a slightly wavy profile, has an almost entirely linear leverage ratio. If one adds the shock force to the design, one ends up with a wheel rate that looks like this for each bike. The wheel rate shows the forces acting on the wheel by the shock due to the frame design. Through this kinematics analysis, one can conclude that the Offering is going to have slightly better small bump compliance without sacrificing bottom-out prevention. Hopefully one can also see just how much of an effect the linkage part of the linkage-driven single pivot design has on the suspension response. When comparing the wheel path and chain growth of the Offering and Process, it becomes apparent that the Offering has a slightly more rearward axle path and higher chain growth due to its higher main pivot point. The Offering has an overall chain growth of 24.6mm or 5.7%, while the Process has a growth of only 20.6mm or 4.8%, despite having 13mm more rear wheel travel. The following conclusions can be made about linkage-driven single-pivot suspension designs and these two bikes in particular. Firstly, the suspension design of both bikes will result in composed level braking, though the Kona will be slightly more active and react slightly better to bumps compared to the Offering, due to its slightly lower anti-rise numbers. Secondly, the anti-squat of the Offering being at or just above 100% for its entire travel will result in no pedal bob and very efficient pedaling, but a slightly less supple suspension compared with the plush response deep in the Kona Process's travel. The Kona by comparison will have a bit of pedal bob during most of its travel. Thirdly, the kinematics of the Evil offering is much more progressive than that of the Kona Process, and will either result in better small bump compliance for the offering, or similar small bump compliance, but much better bottom out resistance, depending on how you set the pressure in your shock. Fourth, the higher chain growth of the Evil offering is going to cause much more pedal kickback, or it'll hit into the suspension slightly if one holds the pedal level while descending. Finally, it's apparent from this analysis that single pivot designs can pedal efficiently and have a more modern progressive response. It all depends on the placement of the pivots between the swing arm and the shock. They're certainly not old school designs. Thanks again for joining me and hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please make sure to subscribe and like the video. And remember, if you want to be a part of the recurring polls to vote on which bike to look at next, make sure to head over to my Patreon page using the links down below. Until next time, happy trails!